The value of forms. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. So tonight I am going across town to help out with a Kung Fu grading. And that means, so it's a test for Kung Fu students to see how well they know and understand and can do the syllabus within the Kung Fu school, all of the different movements and so on. And part of that is simply doing the movements, being able to apply them against a partner or opponent. And part of it is doing forms, which is sequences of movements. Now there's different types of forms. Of course, within Qigong, we do forms as in sequences of movements to stimulate and work with our energy in different ways. And we do some of those in Kung Fu as well, because of course, making our energy healthy and strong and vibrant is very important, very useful for Kung Fu. But we also do a lot of forms which are sequences of fighting movements. Different ways of movement, different fighting techniques, ways that we can apply and work against opponents in different ways, against different types of attacks, different weapons, using different weapons, all of these sorts of things. And it's been quite a while since I've done a grading, for one thing. It's actually been a long time since I've been doing much Kung Fu training myself, and certainly any teaching. I used to, I guess I don't talk about it so much on this channel, but I make reference to Kung Fu every now and then, I'm sure, within some of the videos. But years ago, I used to spend a lot of time teaching Kung Fu. I was full-time teaching Kung Fu and teaching just a lot of classes every week for quite a few years. And it was a really big part of my life. And things have been different over the last little while. Initially because I was traveling a lot, it wasn't practical for me to continue teaching in the way that I had. And then just really busy with other things, with work, particularly with the teaching Qigong. Working with people in different time zones means that I'm often working in the morning and also working at night. And of course, you know, nighttime is the time that's generally most convenient for people to attend Kung Fu classes, things like that. And so it hasn't been something that it's been practical for me to be all that actively involved with. And so from time to time, when I'm able to, but it's not that often, I do go in and help out some of the instructors with the teaching. Again, not that often. And it's been actually a long time since I've even done that. But one of the instructors told me, hey, we're having a grading coming up for the students. Can you come in and help us out with grading? And so I said, yep. I checked my calendar. we talked about some dates to see if I was able to do it, if I could, you know, clear my space that evening to go and help with the grading, and I could. So I said, yep, sure, because I'm always willing to help out when I can. But then, given that it's been a long time since I've been training or teaching myself, I was like thinking, oh, I've got this grading coming up tonight. I'd better freshen up my memory of the syllabus, of all the different things that these students are being tested on. Now, again, I've done a lot of this over the years, but it's been quite a while. And so as part of that, I thought, like, I'd better go through some of these forms, because a lot of these forms are quite long. They involve quite a lot of different techniques. For example, some of the weapons forms, they have 4 fighting techniques, and so in each technique can involve a number of movements. They probably average about 5 movements within a single technique, and then 4 techniques per side, and you go back and forth, and there's 4 sides. So that's 16 different fighting techniques involving multiple movements for each technique, and then there are also movements used as you turn from one direction to the other as well. So, you know, you're probably getting up maybe close to 20 techniques just within a single form. And then the students, as they go through their different levels, there's several forms for each level, unarmed, and then ones with weapons, ones involving sticky hands, which is sensitivity training, And then there's all these different levels. There's going to be students grading for different levels. So it's like, I should freshen my memory up, make sure that I'm fresh and able to do a good job of helping out with this grading. And so I spent a little bit of time just yesterday going over some of the forms. And look, I already know this principle. I understand it. But at the same time, I was quite surprised in a way as I started to do some of those forms, just how easily those sequences came together and all those movements came together. Because if I sat and just thought about those forms, those, again, sometimes quite long, some of them aren't so long, but a lot of them are quite long sequences of movements. If I just sat and thought about them, it's like, ooh, don't know, what do you do next, what are all the techniques in here? But actually doing them, just go like, okay, I'm going to start, and I'll do one movement, and then the next movement just comes naturally, and then the next movement just comes naturally, and then the next movement just comes naturally. And there were a couple of places, I'll admit, there were probably 3 or 4, this is across, I don't know, 15 forms or so that I looked at. There were a few places where I had to pause and go like, oh, okay, I need to think about that one. But for the most part, once I started, it's like, okay, next. And this is a big part of, so certainly in a Kung Fu context, I'm going to talk about it in relationship to Qigong as well, but a big part of the benefit that we get from doing forms is it ingrains those movements into our memory, and not just our intellectual memory, into our body memory. It makes it natural for us to just go into different shapes, different movements, different sequences of movements. And that is really important, particularly in a fighting context, because in a fight, things often happen very quickly. You don't necessarily have a lot of time to intellectualize and think about what to do. You need to just be able to do it. And your body remembers, and your body can respond very quickly. As an interesting little factoid, this applies very much to the Chi Sao, the sensitivity drills. Your sense of touch responds about 30 times as fast as your sense of vision. So if you see something and then try to respond to it, it's going to take about 30 times as long as if you feel something and then respond to it. And in many ways, this applies to our muscle memory as well. Those things come out so quickly, so naturally, if it's ingrained in. And look, it takes time, it takes practice to ingrain in. Those movements, I literally would have done thousands of times across the years. And so, yeah, it's ingrained. But even with that, given that it's been, again, I do go in and help from time to time, not very often, and certainly not a lot lately. But it's probably been 6 years at this point since I was actively training, actively teaching. It's just been little bits and pieces since then. And so in that context, to be able to just go and do those forms and have it come back so quickly, even though I understand the principle, it surprised me. It's like, oh, it's still in there. It's still in there. I still have this library, or maybe even encyclopedia, of different fighting techniques that are at my disposal. They're ingrained into my body. My body remembers how to do them and can bring them out when it needs to. So that's within Kung Fu, this body memory. Now look, there's other stuff that comes from forms as well. They are a way not just to remember the movements, but to practice and refine the movements, because it gives you a format to do that within. They also give you ways of practicing transitioning from one movement to another. So there's other things that come from forms as well. Maybe at some point I'll go into more depth. I primarily wanted to focus on the body memory part of this in this video. I might talk about other aspects another time. But this also applies across to Qigong as well. Sometimes we do just individual movements with specific benefits and so on. But often within Qigong, we do sequences of movements, whole sets of movements. And as we do that, we get into habits, patterns, and we ingrain those movements into our body. So we remember those movements. But hopefully we don't just remember those movements, because of course those movements are expressions of principles. Principles of how using our body, using our mind, using our breath works with and affects our energy. And each time we practice, we do those practices, do those movements, we're ingraining those principles deeper and deeper so that we have access to them, so we can draw on them when we need them. And I know I've actually had some conversations with a few students lately who've actually been practicing for quite some time and have benefited hugely from their Qigong practice, and recognize that and appreciate that, and you know, they really love their Qigong practice. But just commenting that, yeah, you know, even after all this time of practicing, sometimes they just feel like they're going through the motions. And of course, it's good as much as possible whenever you're doing whatever practice you're doing to not just be going through the motions, but to be really present and focused on what you're doing, so that you really notice what's going on and, you know, really get as much value from it as you can. But there's actually also benefit in just going through the motions. Just going through those motions is still ingraining those things, keeping them fresh within you. You can then have those principles go deep enough that you can certainly bring them out within the practices as you do them. But even more than that, those ingrained principles then become accessible to you in other aspects of your life as well. Whatever it is that you might be doing, you have it ingrained, moving in different ways to be able to allow your energy to flow, to bring balance, and so on. So yeah, there's a lot of benefit in doing the forms, doing the sequences, doing them as habit, doing them repeatedly, doing them hundreds or even thousands of times, to open up flows, pathways, to refine, you know, to develop the skill in the first place, but then as a way to develop that memory, which means those principles are accessible to you. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the vlog. Like I said, maybe I'll talk about some other aspects of the values of forms another time as well. The main one I wanted to talk about was the memory, and the way things become ingrained. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you on another one soon.